When people picture grid collapse, they imagine cities burning. They're wrong. FEMA displacement models show the real kill zone isn't Manhattan. It's the suburbs that depend on electric pumps for drinking water. 7 states sit on infrastructure so fragile that a sustained blackout turns them from comfortable to uninhabitable within weeks. The data shows exactly how fast each one falls apart. If you live in any of these states, and you don't know your water system's backup power timeline, you're already behind. We're going to count down from number 7 to number 1. Each state scores against 5 survival variables: conflict proximity, weather exposure, freshwater independence, agricultural viability, community infrastructure. The state at number 1 will shock you. It's a state most people consider one of the safest in the country. But the numbers tell a different story. Let's get into it. Number 7, Georgia. On the surface, Georgia looks like a survivor's dream. Long growing season, mild winters compared to the northeast, plenty of rainfall. The problem is that Georgia's survival math falls apart the second you factor in Atlanta. Metro Atlanta holds over 6 million people. That's 6 million mouths in a region where 86% of community water systems depend on electric pumps to move water from treatment facilities to taps. The EPA's own Community Water System Survey data puts Georgia's average backup power window at under 48 hours for most municipal systems outside the city core. Here's what happens. Day 1 feels like a regular power outage. People check their phones. They assume Georgia Power is on it. Day 2, water pressure starts dropping in the northern suburbs. Cobb County, Gwinnett County, Forsyth County. These aren't rural backwaters. These are some of the most densely populated suburbs in the southeast. By day 4, 6 million people realize simultaneously that the water isn't coming back on schedule, and every single one of them is looking at Interstate 75 and Interstate 85 as their way out. The informed response is to already know that Georgia has significant gravity-fed water infrastructure in its mountainous northeast corner. Towns like Dahlonega and Blue Ridge sit on elevation-fed systems that don't require pumps. But here's the twist nobody models. Those mountain towns have populations under 10,000. The ratio of refugees to residents hits 50-1 within 10 days of a sustained blackout. Every county road into the North Georgia mountains becomes a parking lot of desperate families. And those small towns don't have the caloric production capacity to feed themselves, let alone 100,000 newcomers. Georgia grows plenty of pecans and poultry, but commercial poultry operations require electric climate control. Without the grid, 40 million chickens die in their houses within 72 hours. Georgia's agricultural output collapses at almost the same speed as its water systems. Number 6, New Jersey. This is where refugee corridor math starts to matter. New Jersey has the highest population density of any state, 1,200 people per square mile. That number alone should tell you everything, but it gets worse when you map the highway corridors. The New Jersey Turnpike, Interstate 78, Interstate 80, Route 1. These aren't just roads, they're the evacuation arteries for both New York City and Philadelphia. When the grid drops, New Jersey doesn't just deal with its own 9 million residents. It absorbs the outflow from 20 million people on either side. The common mistake is thinking density means resources. It doesn't. New Jersey imports over 90% of its food. The Garden State nickname is a historical artifact. Modern New Jersey has almost zero caloric self-sufficiency. The state produces blueberries and cranberries and some tomatoes. You cannot survive on blueberries. Meanwhile, New Jersey's water systems are among the oldest in the country. Newark's water infrastructure dates to the 19th century. Lead contamination problems that made national news in 2016 were a symptom of a deeper reality. These pipes need constant pressure maintained by electric pumps to function at all. Your tactical move if you're in New Jersey is simple. You leave early or you don't leave at all. The window between grid failure and total highway gridlock is about 18 hours based on modelling from the 2003 Northeast blackout. During that event, 55 million people lost power across the Northeast, and New Jersey's highways became impassable within a single day. That was a blackout that lasted less than 48 hours. A sustained failure measured in weeks turns every major New Jersey highway into a miles-long refugee camp, and the people stuck on those highways have nowhere to go, nothing to drink, and no plan. If you stay, you need a minimum of 30 days of water stored. That's 1 gallon per person per day. A family of 4 needs 120 gallons. Most people don't have 10. Number 5, Arizona. This is where water dependency becomes the entire story. Arizona exists in its current form because of electricity. Full stop. The Central Arizona Project Canal moves 1.5 million acre-feet of water uphill from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson using 14 pumping stations. Every single one of those stations requires grid power. When the grid goes down, Arizona's water supply doesn't diminish, it stops. Phoenix has a population of over 4.8 million in the metro area. The average summer temperature exceeds 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Without air conditioning, indoor temperatures in a standard Phoenix home reach 115 degrees within 6 hours. The human body cannot sustain core temperature regulation at that level for more than 2 to 3 days without adequate hydration, and the water just stopped flowing. The Hollywood version of Arizona grid collapse is people wandering the desert. The documented reality is people dying in their own homes. The 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome killed over 700 people in Oregon and Washington, states far cooler than Arizona. Extrapolate that to Phoenix with no water and no cooling, and you're looking at mortality figures that dwarf anything in modern American disaster history within the first week. The tactical solution for Arizona residents is brutally simple. You need to be within walking distance of a natural water source that doesn't require pumping. In the Phoenix metro area, that means the Salt River or one of its reservoirs. But those water sources serve 4.8 million people. The math doesn't work. The informed response is to already have a pre-positioned water cache outside the metro area and a route planned on county roads, not interstate highways. Interstate 10 and Interstate 17 out of Phoenix become death traps within 12 hours of a sustained grid failure. The twist is the Colorado River itself. 7 states depend on it. When Arizona's pumps fail, every state downstream recalculates its own water math simultaneously. If this kind of pattern analysis is the content you've been looking for, subscribe now, because the top 4 get worse, and the number 1 state is going to change how you think about safety in this country. Number 4, Texas. You already know part of this story. February 2021 proved it. The Texas grid operates independently from the rest of the country. ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, manages a grid that is deliberately isolated from the eastern and western interconnections. This was designed to avoid federal regulation. The consequence is that when the Texas grid fails, there is no neighboring grid to backfill power. Texas doesn't get help. Texas gets cold. During the 2021 winter storm, over 4.5 million homes lost power. The official death toll was listed at 246. Independent analyses from organizations like BuzzFeed News and the University of Houston placed the actual figure closer to 700, and that was a blackout that lasted roughly 4 days for most affected areas. Scale that to 4 weeks and the numbers become almost incomprehensible. Here's what makes Texas uniquely dangerous at number 4, caloric deficit math. Texas has enormous agricultural capacity: cattle, cotton, grain sorghum. But modern Texas agriculture depends entirely on the grid. Feedlots need electric pumps for water. Grain storage facilities need electric climate control to prevent spoilage. Slaughterhouses need refrigeration. Without the grid, Texas cattle die of dehydration in their pens within 5 days. The raw agricultural capacity exists on paper. In a grid-down scenario, it's inaccessible. The population distribution makes this worse. Texas has 3 metro areas over 1 million people: Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, and San Antonio. That's roughly 15 million people in areas with limited walkable water access. The Gulf Coast provides water, but also provides hurricane exposure, chemical plant vulnerability, and mosquito-borne disease vectors that explode without modern sanitation. The informed Texan identifies their county's water table depth and nearest gravity-fed water source before any emergency begins. Most Texas wells require electric pumps to reach water at depths exceeding 200 feet. Hand pump conversions exist but require specific equipment that sells out nationally within 72 hours of any major grid event. The twist that makes Texas a war zone rather than just a disaster area is firearms per capita. Texas has an estimated 35 million civilian firearms. When 15 million people in 3 metro areas run out of water simultaneously, and every household within driving distance of a natural water source is armed, you don't get an orderly evacuation. You get competition, lethal competition. Historical precedent from Katrina showed that armed confrontations over resources began within 5 days in areas surrounding New Orleans. Texas starts with roughly 10 times the firearms density. Let's pause from the state-by-state breakdown for a moment, because understanding why these states fail requires understanding how the grid itself fails. The American electrical grid isn't one system, it's 3. The Eastern Interconnection, the Western Interconnection, and Texas. These 3 grids are linked by only a handful of high-voltage direct current ties. A failure in one doesn't automatically cascade to the others, but within each interconnection the cascade effect is devastating. In 2003, a software bug at First Energy Corporation in Ohio triggered a cascade that left 55 million people across the northeastern United States and parts of Canada without power. One software bug, one control room, 55 million people in the dark. The grid recovered within 2 days because the failure was localized and the surrounding infrastructure was intact. Now imagine that same cascade happening during a coordinated cyber attack, a massive solar storm, or a physical assault on key transformer substations. The Department of Energy has testified before Congress that the replacement timeline for large power transformers is 18 to 24 months. They're custom built. Many are manufactured overseas. There is no strategic reserve of these transformers. Destroy 9 of the right substations and you black out the entire country for over a year. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the finding of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's own vulnerability assessment. 9 substations. 18 months of darkness. Now look at the next 3 states knowing that. Number 3, Florida. Florida's danger isn't theoretical, it's been rehearsed. Hurricane after hurricane has stress-tested Florida's infrastructure, and the results are consistent. When the power goes out, Florida becomes hostile to human life faster than almost anywhere else in the country. Start with the demographics. Florida has the highest percentage of residents over 65 of any state. Over 21%. That population has disproportionate medication dependency, heat vulnerability, and mobility limitations. During Hurricane Irma in 2017, 14 residents of a Hollywood, Florida nursing home died from heat exposure after their air conditioning failed. That was with emergency services still operational. Remove emergency services entirely and multiply by every nursing home, assisted living facility, and homebound elderly resident in the state. The number is staggering. Florida's water table presents a unique problem. Most of the state sits on the Floridan aquifer, which sounds like an advantage until you realize that the aquifer requires electric pumps for extraction, and that saltwater intrusion is already compromising coastal wells under normal conditions. Without grid power maintaining pump pressure, saltwater infiltrates the aquifer from the coast inward. This isn't a months-long process. Saltwater intrusion accelerates within days once pumping stops in coastal areas. South Florida's water supply doesn't just disappear, it becomes toxic. The common failure mode in Florida is staying. Floridians have survived dozens of hurricanes by riding them out. That experience creates a dangerous muscle memory. A 72-hour power outage from a hurricane and a multi-week grid failure are fundamentally different events, but normalcy bias treats them the same. The Floridian who rode out Andrew in '92 assumes they can ride out anything. They can't ride out their water becoming salt water in week 2. Social cohesion data matters here. Florida ranks near the bottom nationally in community mutual aid network density. High transient populations, gated communities, retirement enclaves. These are not structures that produce collective survival responses. Contrast this with states where multi-generational communities have deep social ties and shared resource traditions. Florida's social architecture is designed for consumption, not cooperation. When the grid goes down, that design flaw becomes lethal. Number 2, California. California is the moral dilemma state. It has everything you need to survive, and none of it is accessible without the grid. The Central Valley produces over half of the nation's fruits, vegetables, and nuts. California's agricultural output is worth over $50 billion annually. But the Central Valley's irrigation depends on the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, both of which use massive electric pumps to move water from Northern California to Southern California, and from the Sacramento Delta to the fields. Without grid power, the most productive farmland in the Western Hemisphere goes dry within days. Now layer in the population math, almost 40 million people. Los Angeles County alone holds over 10 million. The Los Angeles Aqueduct moves water 233 miles from the Owens Valley to the city. It uses gravity for part of that distance, but key segments require pumping stations. San Diego imports roughly 90% of its water. The San Francisco Bay Area depends on the Hetch Hetchy system, which is gravity-fed from Yosemite, but requires electric treatment and distribution at the municipal level. The moral dilemma in California is resource access. When the grid fails, rural Central Valley communities sit on top of the nation's food supply. Urban populations in Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Bay Area have the numbers but not the resources. Interstate 5, the main artery connecting these regions, becomes simultaneously the most critical and most dangerous road in the country. Historical precedent shows that urban to rural migration during resource crises creates conflict at the boundary line. It happened during the Dust Bowl in reverse when rural populations flooded California cities. Flip that flow and arm it with modern desperation. California's fire vulnerability compounds everything. Without grid power, the firefighting infrastructure collapses. Hydrants depend on water pressure maintained by electric pumps. The state that already burns every summer becomes a state that burns without any ability to respond. And fire displaces populations into the same refugee corridors already clogged with people fleeing water scarcity. The informed Californian doesn't plan to stay in a major metro area. The informed Californian has already identified communities in Northern California with gravity-fed water systems, local agricultural capacity, and populations small enough to sustain on regional resources. Humboldt County, Trinity County, parts of Mendocino. But even these solutions come with a timestamp. Once urban populations begin moving north, those small communities face the same ratio problem as North Georgia. There isn't a clean answer, there's only a head start. Number 1. Virginia. This is the state that shocks everyone. Virginia. The state that people picture as rolling green hills, historical battlefields, and quiet suburban life around the D.C. Beltway. Virginia consistently ranks among the best states to live in. High median income, excellent schools, proximity to the seat of federal power, and that proximity is exactly what makes it the most dangerous state in the country when the grid goes down. Let's run all 5 survival variables. Conflict proximity. Northern Virginia sits directly adjacent to Washington, D.C. When the federal government activates continuity of operations plans, military and federal law enforcement assets converge on the national capital region. Martial law, if declared, centers here first. Every major refugee flow from the eastern seaboard funnels toward D.C., because the civilian assumption is that the federal government will provide aid at the capital. That assumption puts millions of people on Interstate 95, Interstate 66 and Interstate 81, all of which run directly through Virginia. Weather exposure. Virginia's winters are cold enough to kill without heating. Average January lows in the Shenandoah Valley drop below 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Not extreme by northern standards, but lethal for populations dependent on electric heat pumps, which is exactly what most Virginia homes use. Virginia's mild climate means most homes were built without wood stoves, fireplaces, or passive heating capability. They were built for the grid. Freshwater independence. Virginia's municipal water systems score poorly on backup power duration. The Fairfax County water system serves over 1.8 million people and depends entirely on electric pumping from the Potomac River and the Occoquan Reservoir. Average backup generator fuel supply for these systems covers 48 to 72 hours. After that, 1.8 million people in one of the wealthiest counties in America are without drinking water. Agricultural viability. Virginia produces wine, tobacco, and some cattle. It does not produce anywhere close to the caloric output needed to sustain its 8.6 million residents. The state imports the vast majority of its food through supply chains that depend on refrigerated trucking, which depends on diesel fuel, which depends on electric pumps at fuel depots. Each dependency collapses the one behind it like dominoes, community infrastructure. And here's where Virginia's hidden vulnerability becomes catastrophic. Northern Virginia is home to data centers that process an estimated 70% of the world's internet traffic. Loudoun County alone hosts the highest concentration of data centers on the planet. These facilities have massive backup generator systems, diesel generators that can run for days, and when civilian water runs out and civilian food runs out and civilian fuel runs out, 8.6 million Virginians will know exactly where the generators and fuel reserves are. The collision between civilian desperation and federally protected critical infrastructure is the scenario that no planning document addresses honestly. The callback to our opening is this. You pictured cities burning. Virginia doesn't burn. Virginia suffocates quietly under the weight of its own strategic importance. The most connected, most governed, most infrastructure-dense state in the Union becomes the most contested ground in the country. Not because Virginia is weak, because everyone else needs what Virginia has, and Virginia can't feed, water, or warm its own population while defending those assets. 43 million Americans get their drinking water from systems that have less than 72 hours of backup power. That's not a projection. That's EPA infrastructure data sitting in a public database right now. 43 million people, 3 days, and then the water stops. The 7 states we just walked through aren't inherently broken. They're built on a single assumption, that the lights stay on. When that assumption fails, every invisible dependency becomes visible all at once. The water pump that nobody thinks about, the highway corridor that seemed like convenience, the mild climate that eliminated the need for wood heat, the population density that felt like community. Each one is a thread, and the grid is the hand holding them all together. You imagined cities on fire. The data shows something quieter and worse. Suburbs going dry, pharmacies going empty, highways becoming parking lots of people with nowhere to go. The danger isn't dramatic, it's administrative. It's the gap between what your infrastructure promises and what it can deliver without electricity. Here's what I want you to do. One thing. Find out whether your municipal water system is pump dependent or gravity fed. One phone call to your local utility. That single piece of information changes every calculation you'll ever make about staying or leaving. It takes 5 minutes. Most people will never make that call. You're not most people. Which state did you expect to see on this list that wasn't here? And which one shocked you? Drop your state in the comments and tell me why you think it should or shouldn't be on this list. The grid is the most taken for granted system in the country. Now you know what happens when it isn't there. Plan accordingly.